Hey there folks, how is everyone doing today? Today I'm bringing you a follow-up to a video I made a long time ago. This one's going to be a bit different though. So what that original video was is a tier list of all the common champions in Raid Shadow Legends. Today I'm going to start a series where I go through each and every single faction in the game and rank their epic champions to start, and then we're going to move on to the rares. And this is going to be on a proper tier list, so I have Tier Maker here on my second monitor, which I'm going to be pulling over intermittently to kind of show you where everyone ranks. We're starting with the Bannerlords, so we're going to be ranking every single Bannerlord epic. Couple things I want to cover. These tier lists are going to be pretending that this particular rarity is the only thing that exists in the game, because obviously if you compare these epics to rares, most of them are going to be S tier, and if you compare them to legendaries, a lot of them will be F tier because of that. So we're pretending that no other rarity of champion exists besides epics. This is not faction war specific or anything like that though either. I'm just going faction by faction, so this is going to be kind of an overall ranking for the game. This guide or review might kind of help you though if you're in early game, mid game, whatever, and you're just trying to figure out what champions are good for which area of the game. I got my handy little notepad here as well, which is going to have all of the rankings saved on it so that I don't have to worry about forgetting where I rank the champion. So first up, we're going to be covering Horden. Horden is going to be kind of a champion that sadly got power crept quite a bit in my opinion. Faction Wars aura here. Increase attack, increase crit rate, and a increased speed for 2 turns, grants an extra turn. So this is going to be on a 5-turn, 4-turn cooldown once the extra turn comes through. That's a bit high in my opinion. His A2 doesn't really do a whole lot here. Really what you're going to be concerned with is the A1, which is attacking somebody 2 times, and it grants an extra turn if the target is killed. So if we come over here to the tier list, we have Mr. Horden right here. Where am I ranking this champion? I'm going to be putting this champion into the C tier. Nothing wrong with the champion really. Like I say, I think he got power crept a decent little bit. With a C tier champion, that's pretty much where all of the damage dealers are going to be going unless they offer something more. Damage dealers are pretty much a dime a dozen in Raid Shadow Legends these days. Hell, even support champions can do damage if they're built with simple crit rate. So again, a damage dealer that doesn't really bring anything else is going into the C tier unless otherwise specified. Lordly Legionary, speaking of power creep, this guy is a free login champion on like day 90 or some such. His A1 is going to attack somebody 2 times. He's going to place an extra hit if it's under a heal reduction, and 2 extra hits if they're under a 100% heal reduction. He doesn't bring heal reduction though, so that's fantastic. He attacks one enemy, 100% chance of placing decreased speed, and decreases the turn meter by 20% if it's placed, and then a reflect damage and a continuous heal on all allies for 2 turns on a 4-turn cooldown. Overall, I'm putting this champion into the F tier, and a little bit of a spoiler for everybody here, this is actually going to be the only champion that's occupying the F tier for the Bannerlord epic faction. So quite funny there that it's going to be Lordly Legionary, which is the true free-to-play champion in this faction. We have Archmage Helmet. Archmage Helmet is a Doom Tower easy champion, or normal champion I guess I should say. He has an increased speed in arena battles by 17%. He is immune to turn meter decreasing effects. He places an increased speed, increased crit rate, and increased crit damage on all allies for 2 turns on a 3-turn cooldown. Attacks one enemy, also attacks all other enemies if the first attack is critical. The second attack has a, would that be like a 75% chance of placing a stun? After attacking, decreases the turn meters of each enemy without a stun debuff by 20%. And his A1 attacks one enemy, fills his turn meter by 10%, fills the turn meter by 20% if it's critical. So obviously build him out with crit rate, 108 base speed, and really good HP, really good defense to start off. This is an absolutely fantastic champion. For people who have been playing Raid Shadow Legends for a very long time, you can probably guess where this fellow is going to go, and that is straight into the S tier. So of course, Archmage Helmet, fantastic champion, absolutely deserves his S tier position. Next up, we are going to have Gerhard the Stone, however you want to say his name. A1 attacks one enemy, 15 to 25% chance of placing a stun debuff, has a 40% chance which books to 50 for 1 turn if they have more than 75% turn meter. Decent skill overall. His A2 places a 30% increased crit rate and an increased crit damage on him, then attacks one enemy, will ignore 25% of the target's defense, and will ignore 50% of the target's defense instead if they're under an increased defense buff. So this is actually a pretty good skill on a 3-turn cooldown. The multiplier is pretty high. It's like a 5.5 times multiplier. So overall, I would say this champion is decent. Also, every third turn, roughly, he's going to be immune to Fear, True Fear, Freeze, Provoke, Stun, Sleep, and Petrification debuffs. So, decent champion here. Damage dealers are going to be going into the C tier unless they offer something else. So Gerhard here, if I can actually full screen this, he is going to be going into, where is he first of all? Right here. You'll notice some of the icons are grayed out. That's simply because I don't have that champion. So Gerhard the Stone is going to be going into the B tier. He's an overall decent champion, I would say. You know, he's got some good stuff going on there. Next up is going to be Arndolf. Arndolf is going to be placing a reflect damage on all allies for 2 turns and a counterattack on himself for 2 turns. This is going to be on a 3-turn cooldown, which is kind of the less power-crept version of Lordly Legionary. A2 attacks all enemies, 75% chance of placing a weaken, as well as a 25 books to a 50% chance of placing a fear. Fear is kind of the smaller version of the debuff though, so you know, it just kind of procs and makes them miss their turn, whereas True Fear puts that skill on cooldown, and then his A1 has a 30% chance of placing a provoke. So overall, a pretty decent champion. Arndolf is going to go ahead and be placed into the C tier, however. He's kind of, like I said, like a Lordly Legionary, except not power crept, so because of that, he's just 1 rank above Lordly Legionary. Not too impressed with the champion. I do have him, of course. I'll probably build him out at some point because he is a fantastic looking champion, but his actual kit leaves a bit to be desired. Next up, we are going to have Oathbound. Oathbound is a good CC champion, so his A1 has a 35, 45, 50% chance of placing a freeze on an A1, and damage inflicted is proportional to defense, but damage is based on attack and defense for some reason. Come on, Raid. Attacks all enemies, 75% chance of placing a 50% decrease attack. This goes up to 100% on a 3-turn cooldown. Also has a 55, that'll go up to 65, 70, 75 chance of decreasing each target's turn meter by 20%. And his A3 attacks 4 times at random. Each attack has a 30% chance of placing a block active skills. This is going to go up to 50%. The chance of it placing increases to 100% if they're under a decrease attack. So basically you have him run in with this, and then you have him run in with this. If this is Faction Wars, this champion's actually really good for locking down the waves and whatnot. So Oathbound here, he is going to go ahead and be placed into the B tier with Gerhard the Stone. Pretty decent champion for crowd control overall, like I mentioned, and yeah, I would highly recommend him as far as the B tier at least. Next up, we have Chancellor Yasmin. So she's going to attack one enemy and place an extra hit if they have no active buffs. She is healing an ally by 40% of their max HP, heals by 60% instead if the ally has 50% HP or less, so that's on a 2-turn cooldown, which is pretty good. And then her A3 has a 60-75% chance of removing all buffs, then placing a sleep for 1 turn on all enemies who have active buffs. So that's a bit interesting, and she increases ally speed in all battles by 20%. Overall, I had to kind of debate where I wanted to put Yasmin because, you know, she is a good support champion and whatnot. Overall, I decided I was going to go ahead and put her into the B tier. She doesn't do anything particularly special enough to actually warrant getting a higher rank than that, in my opinion. Next up, we have Seneschal, whatever his name might be, A1. Attacks one enemy, has a 40% chance of placing a leech debuff for 2 turns, not a bad skill. Places a perfect veil buff and a continuous heal on an ally for 2 turns. This is going to be on a 2-turn cooldown, so it's basically the buffed up version of Yasmin there. And he places a counterattack buff on this champion for 2 turns, and then he has a 100% chance when booked of placing a provoke on all enemies for 1 turn on a 4-turn cooldown. So very simple kit there. The thing with this champion though is he is actually still going to end up in the B tier, and the reason for that is he does Yasmin's kit a little bit better when it comes to the heals and whatnot, but then with the provoke it's on such a long cooldown that for most content you're gonna have trouble cycling back around to it unless this guy is ridiculously fast. So I couldn't really justify putting him in the A tier or higher than Yasmin. I think those two are at a very similar skill ceiling, in my opinion at least. Next up, we are going to have Alaric. So Alaric is going to be an interesting champion. He attacks one enemy, 30% chance of decreasing the target's turn meter by 7.5%, decreases it by a further 3% for each buff on the target. Kind of very situational, obviously. You're not going to have too many situations where, you know, they have active buffs in PvE at least. Attacks one enemy, 50% chance, books up to 75 of removing 2 random buffs from the target before attacking. Has a 75 book to 100 of stealing 2 random buffs instead if the target has 4 or more buffs. Excuse me. Kind of a PvP skill there, I would say, considering that in PvE you're not going to have a whole lot of champions that are rocking 4 or more buffs. If you do, you're probably doing something wrong, in all honesty. Attacks all enemies, has a 75 books to 100% chance of placing a decrease attack and a decrease accuracy debuff on all enemies for 2 turns. And his aura is ally attack in faction crypts by 29%. So overall, where would I put Alaric? I would go ahead and I would place Alaric in the C tier. Alaric is going in the C tier because, like I mentioned, champions are basically going there if they're damage dealers unless they offer something a little bit more. So you do have some damage dealers that offer a little bit more coming up. One of them is going to be Lady Quillen. I actually got her on one of my free-to-play accounts, and I absolutely love her because of it. So she attacks one enemy, fills her turn meter by 15% if this attack is critical. Her A2 is going to attack one enemy, place an extra hit if it's critical, fill the turn meters of all allies by 30% if it kills an enemy. It's on a 3-turn cooldown. Attacks all enemies, placing a increased crit damage and a increased attack on all allies if the attack is critical. So having a damage dealer that can also buff on one of her damage dealing skills is fantastic. And because of that, Lady Quillen is going to be going into the B tier. So if she had maybe a little bit more to her kit, I would probably end up putting her in the A tier, but as it stands right now, I would say she's going to go ahead and go into the B, which I would say is still pretty good considering she is a damage dealing champion, and it's hard for them, in my mind at least, to get out of the C tier. Next up, we are going to have Sir Artemage. So Sir Artemage is going to be bringing an attack one enemy 2 times. First hit has a 50% chance of placing the big version of decreased defense. Second hit has a 50% chance of placing the big version of decreased speed. Pretty good A1 right there. Removes all debuffs from this champion, then attacks all enemies. So if you think about it, that is going to be removing things like decreased attack, decreased defense, stuns. Just kidding, not stuns because that'll miss his turn. But any sort of damage reduction, essentially it's going to be removing from this champion, right? So pretty good skill there. And he attacks one enemy, will ignore 30% of the target's defense. He's going to place a 50% increase attack and 30% increase crit damage buff on the champion for 2 turns if the attack kills an enemy. And these buffs cannot be removed, and this is on a 4-turn cooldown. Overall, this champion is very good in the way that he only requires, 8 books? Like, that's almost unheard of for champions these days. Because of that, as well as the utility he brings, Sir Artemage is going to be ranking solidly in the B tier. Next up, we are going to have Knight Errant. Knight Errant brings an attack one enemy, 30% chance, book up to a 50 of placing a leech. Will ignore 30% of the target's defense. A2 attacks one enemy, has a 90% chance of placing a stun, resets the cooldown on each of his skills if the target is killed. This is on a 4-turn cooldown. And attacks one enemy, has a 60% chance, books to 100 of placing a weaken for 2 turns. Damage increased by 75% if he has full HP. The problem with that, though, is that's on a 6-turn cooldown. A 6-turn cooldown in 2023. We have champions that probably hit harder than this dude that do it on like half the duration, or like on an AoE on like a 3-turn cooldown instead of a 6-turn single target cooldown. So because of that, we kind of go back to the same thing here where Knight Errant is going to be hitting the C tier. I couldn't just bring myself to put him into the F tier with Lordly Legionary because I think that is a spot that he deserves to occupy all on his own. However, you know, it is what it is. C tier is where he's going to reside. Stag Knight, super simple champion, amazing base stats here, almost 21k base HP, almost 1100 base defense. A1 attacks one enemy 2 times. Each hit has a 50% chance of placing a big version of decreased speed, so you're almost guaranteed to get the decreased speed every time on this guy. Attacks all enemies, books up to a 95% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense and the big version of decreased attack on an AoE on a 3-turn cooldown. Get him with, what is it, like Sniper or something like that, that increases the chance of placing it by 5%. You got on 100% zip. I don't think I have him on Sniper, though. I had him on War Master or something like that. And additionally, he has a unique passive here where he places increased accuracy buff on an ally for 1 turn each time the ally has a debuff resisted by an enemy. So that has no cooldown either, so no matter how many times you're getting resisted, this guy can keep placing the increased accuracy there for you. Because of his kit and the special place that he has in my heart, he is going to go ahead and occupy the S tier with Archmage Helmet so far. Next up, we are going to be moving on to Fearmonger. Fearmonger is, of course, the Jason Voorhees looking kind of dude. So he's going to attack one enemy 2 times. Each hit decrease the turn meter by 7.5 if they're under a fear or true fear, and it reduces the cooldown of his Taste of Despair passive skill by 1 turn if it kills an enemy. That passive is going to fill his turn meter by 50% whenever an enemy's HP drops below 20%, which is a weird passive. It'd be better if it just gave him an extra turn or something like that. This is on a 4-turn cooldown. A2 attacks one enemy, has a 100% chance of placing a fear for 1 turn, and a 100% chance of the big version of decreased speed for 2 turns. Has a 100% chance of placing a true fear debuff on 2 enemies for 1 turn if this attack kills an enemy. One of those is going to go on the enemy with the lowest turn meter, and one of those is going to go on the enemy with the highest turn meter, of course. Attacks one enemy, will ignore 35% of the target's defense if the target is under a fear or true fear debuff. Places a block debuff buff for 1 turn, a 30% increased speed for 2 turns, and a revive on death for 2 turns on this champion if this attack kills an enemy on a 4-turn cooldown. Overall, and this is probably going to shock some people, I'm going to go ahead and place this champion into the C tier. It kind of goes back to that thing. Once again, damage dealers are going to have a hard time getting out of the C tier unless they offer something else. We have Gizcard, the Sigiled, however you want to say his name there. A1 attacks one enemy, 50% chance, books to a 75% chance of placing a decreased attack. That's right up there with some of the legendaries on an A1 of placing a decreased attack, so fantastic champion for that reason. Attacks all enemies, has a 75% chance of placing a provoke debuff for 1 turn. Also places a shield buff on this champion equal to 25% of their max HP. This is on a 3-turn cooldown, damage based on defense. Fantastic skill, and he's going to place the big version of increased defense and increase attack on all allies for 2 turns on a 3-turn cooldown. Additionally, his passive is going to fill his turn meter by 15% whenever they're attacked by an enemy under a provoke or increase attack buff. So this champion is absolutely fantastic. I'm sure his ranking is going to come as a surprise to no one when I go ahead and put him into the S tier, of course, and he will be the 3rd champion joining that rank. So welcome to the S tier there, Gizcard, not Gizcarl. The next champion is going to be Ulfrig, I think is how you'd want to say his name, Jarl Ulfrig here. This champion was basically just an intern at Plarium who decided to put himself into the game, as you can tell. Don't know about that for sure, but based on the visuals here, that's certainly the vibe I get. A1 attacks one enemy, 20% chance of placing a decrease attack debuff for 2 turns. This is going to go up to a 40% chance. Real quick, go ahead and let me know down in the comments, by the way, if you disagree with any of the rankings so far, where you would put people, all that sort of good stuff. I'm sure I'm going to have plenty of people disagreeing with me, so I'd love to hear where you'd put them instead. A2 is going to attack all enemies, has a 100% chance of stealing 1 random buff from each enemy, also placing a 15% continuous heal buff on all allies for 2 turns. This is on a 3-turn cooldown. He fills the turn meters of all allies by 15% and places a big version of increased attack on them for 2 turns on a 4-turn cooldown, and his passive removes all decreased attack debuffs from all allies at the start of this champion's turn, and he also has a ally speed in all battles by 15%. So even though this champion looks very generic, his kit actually says something incredibly different, and because of that, we're going to go ahead and be placing him into the A tier. So he's actually the first champion occupying the A tier, just a little bit outside the S tier in my opinion. Next up is Lady Annabelle. There are 2 big reasons I like this champion, and that of course is going to be her passive in her A3, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So she attacks one enemy 2 times. Each hit heals this champion by 3% of her max HP. Her A2 attacks all enemies, has a 100% chance when booked of placing a leech for 2 turns, also a 100% chance of placing a big version of decreased speed on targets with less than 50% turn meter. And A3, she's swapping HP with a target ally and then placing a revive on death on whichever one of them has lower HP after. And then she's also going to place a 30% increased speed on all allies for 2 turns, so fantastic, but her passive is going to heal this champion by 50% of her max HP whenever an ally or an enemy dies. So this skill is absolutely fantastic. This champion looks really cool in my opinion as well. She can actually solo Bommel as well. There's some builds of her going around doing that. It is absolutely crazy because of her skills and because of her passive and all that sort of stuff. Again, the 2 big reasons I like her. They're going to be going, she is going to be going into the A tier. Fantastic champion. Love to see it. I wish there was more champions like her in the game. Rowan was actually back in the day on one of my most wanted champion lists that I uploaded a video of. A1 attacks one enemy, has a 70% chance of placing 100% heal reduction debuff for 2 turns. Her damage on this is based on attack and speed, so she's very unique. There's not many champions like that. Attacks 3 times at random. Each hit has a 60% chance placing a stun for 1 turn. Decent skill there. And then additionally attacks one enemy 4 times. Each hit has a 75% chance of placing a 5% poison debuff for 2 turns. This is going to go up to a 100% chance. So overall, and this is on a 3-turn cooldown too, by the way, so this is absolutely fantastic. The fact that, you know, she's placing so many poisons and whatnot is amazing. I'm probably going to end up having to build her out. I do have her, of course, but I haven't maxed her or anything like that, sadly. In this game, there's a lot of champions that require my resources, and it's a struggle to get around to all of them. She is going into the B tier, and I think that position is very deserved considering she's one of the few damage dealers that made it out of the C tier. Here we have Azure. So Azure is going to be bringing in A1, which attacks one enemy 2 times. Each hit has a 30% chance of placing a stun for 1 turn. The chance increases to 100% if the target has an increased speed buff. So this could be good for an arena cut-in team or something like that, where he just basically cuts in. He can't weak hit really because of his affinity. He's going to place an ally protection buff on all allies except his champion for 2 turns. He's placing a shield on himself equal to 40% of his max HP, and the buff can't be removed. Great base HP, but this is on a 4-turn cooldown. A3 attacks one enemy, places an extra hit if they have a stun. The extra hit is always critical. Steal 50% of their turn meter if they're not under a stun, based on attack and HP. Overall, I was a little bit disappointed by this champion, so because of that, I'm going to be going ahead and placing him into the C tier. This champion doesn't do a whole lot besides bringing a little bit of damage there, of course, so I can't rank him much higher than that. Next up, we have Warcaster. Warcaster has been used in a lot of unkillable comps. So he attacks one enemy, 40% chance, books up to a 50 of stealing 2 random buffs from the target. A2 attacks all enemies, has a 65-75% chance of placing a block buffs debuff for 2 turns on a 3-turn cooldown, and he places a block damage buff on all allies for 1 turn on a 4-turn cooldown, and then avoid ally crit rate in all battles by 23%. Given, you know, the rate of that as well as his actual kit and whatnot, I would have to actually go ahead and place him into the C tier. Just kind of disappointed with the champion. He doesn't offer a whole lot besides that 1-turn block damage. Ursala the Mourner, who I actually got from a guaranteed void event. I'm very happy I went for her. She carried my Faction Wars team. Attacks one enemy. She's heavy on books, by the way. Attacks one enemy, has a 55% chance of decreasing the turn meter by 10%. AoE, decrease attack on 100%, and placing an increased attack on all allies for 2 turns on a 3-turn cooldown once you've fed her a small library. And of course her A3, which she's most known for, is reviving all dead allies with 75% HP, filling their turn meters by 50%, and placing an increased defense and a 25% strength on all allies for 3 turns on a 5-turn cooldown. The only way this could be better is if it was on like a 4-turn cooldown, but this is a fantastic champion. She's fast, she's got decent HP, no defense sadly. She was spending too much time reading and not practicing, I suppose. Speed in Doom Tower battles by 24%. Overall, this champion, her ranking is going to confuse and surprise absolutely no one when I place her into the S tier. This is going to be the finalized tier list right here. So the Bannerlords, in my opinion, actually turned out a little bit bottom heavy. I was expecting to have more champions in the A or B tier, if I'm being honest, but in all honesty, I'm also kind of surprised I didn't put more than 1 champion in the F tier. If you disagree with this, like I said, let me know down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Additionally, what I think I'm going to do to finalize this series is once I've gone through all of the factions and ranked all of the champions, I will go ahead and do a separate video taking all of the S tier champions that I ranked from each faction and then going ahead and ranking them compared to each other. So it'll be just kind of like the best of the best tier ranking. And I think this system is a little bit better because, you know, if you're struggling with a certain faction or whatnot, you can just go ahead, go to these tier lists for that particular faction, maybe get some ideas for faction wars, those sorts of things. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.